There are mornings when the first light touches the window ledge, and one feels as if living inside a peaceful dream. I once had mornings like that, where everything seemed in its rightful place, with the right people, at the right time. My name is Jada, and I once believed that hard work and loyalty could shield me from all harm. At that time, I worked at one of the most renowned creative marketing firms in the city, Westlake Consulting, a place where emotional marketing campaigns had stirred the media for many years. The office was perched on the 18th floor of a glass building, where sunlight flooded through tall windows and life always buzzed as if success were just an arm's reach away. I loved that place, not only for the work, but for the sense of belonging, for the belief that I was helping to build lasting bonds between brands and people. Every project, every presentation, every strategy I crafted felt like a piece of my own heart being offered. Ryan Turner, the newly appointed executive director brought in from a major corporation, entered that scene like a cold gust of wind in midsummer. He had a sharp smile, shirts always perfectly pressed, and ties so precisely adjusted they almost irritated the eye. Ryan did not believe in emotional marketing like we did. To him, everything was about numbers, the currency of performance, values like trust, authenticity, or human connection were nothing but unnecessary burdens in his eyes. At first, I paid little attention. I stayed focused on the work, the fiery brainstorming sessions with the team, the late nights spent waiting for proposal approvals, the gleam of hope in my colleagues' eyes when a campaign passed. I believed that if I worked hard enough, was sincere enough, no one could deny my efforts. I believed that a company once built on dreams and trust would not easily turn cold. I believed so until the day everything fell apart. The biggest campaign of the year, called Revive, which I had led from its earliest idea, was nearing the final signing stage. I remember that morning vividly, sunlight pouring through the windows, my coffee still steaming, and the approval email from the client lighting up my screen. The whole team hugged each other in a wave of joy. I stood there, amidst the embraces and congratulations, believing that finally, my efforts would be rewarded. Yet that very afternoon, during the wrap-up meeting, Ryan entered the conference room with his familiar icy gaze. He presented Revive as if it were entirely his creation, a product of his so-called strategic innovations. I sat there, heart pounding inside my chest, as I watched the presentation slides that I had painstakingly designed appear on the screen. There was no mention of my name, no recognition of the team that had carried this dream. In the harsh white light of the conference room, I saw Daniel, the intern I once mentored, sitting behind Ryan, nodding like a loyal student. A few days later, I received an invitation from HR not to receive an award as I naively thought, but to inform me that I was being restructured. The reason given was short and brutally impersonal, stating, "Staff adjustments aligned with the new development strategy." I remember sitting there, clutching the corner of the letter, feeling as if the entire room tilted. None of the people who had clapped my shoulders in celebration spoke up for me. No explanations, no apologetic glances. Sarah, my closest client, who had often wept during our consultations under the pressure of her business, knew nothing of my dismissal. Emily, the timid intern I had taught to present, now avoided my gaze in the corridors. Daniel, who once scratched his head in frustration over metrics I had guided him through, was now too busy chasing Ryan through internal meetings. Marissa, the project team leader, passed me once at the elevator and gave my arm a slight squeeze, her eyes full of silent guilt, unable to form a single word. On the day I packed my things, the office swallowed me in silence. Even the sunlight seemed to dim, each of my footsteps echoing across the cold stone floor. I remember sitting motionless for a long time in front of my empty desk, the untouched coffee cup from that morning still cooling beside me, thinking about all the years gone by. I had believed in real values, in enduring trust, in relationships built with sincerity, only to see it all wiped away by a gust of wind carrying words like efficiency, optimization, and team restructuring. When I left the building that afternoon, a sudden rain fell, heavy drops pounding the stone steps. I stood beneath the eaves, gripping the box of my belongings, my heart hollow. I did not cry. I only felt a cold emptiness spreading from my chest to the tips of my fingers. Losing trust does not explode into pain the way people imagine. It drains everything quietly, leaving behind a silent, colorless void. That night, in a small rented room, I sat in front of my laptop, staring at my LinkedIn profile, the list of projects I had led, the endorsements my colleagues once wrote for me. They were still there, glittering like little stones along the path I had once walked, but I no longer believed in them. I had believed that, if I were good, if I tried hard enough, the world would be fair. That belief died that stormy night, along with my name being erased from the company's records. In the silence of the night, a chilling truth surfaced. A person can be betrayed not only by enemies, but also by the very place they once called home. One can lose not just a job, but the dreams that once lit their life, and when everything has been taken away, the only thing left is the quiet question echoing in the mind. Is it still possible to start over when everything once believed in has shattered? I did not have an answer that night. I only sat there, under the blurred yellow light of that rented room, holding tightly to an empty ceramic cup, clinging to the last fragment of a memory not yet washed away. There are days when one wakes up without expecting anything good ahead. There is no despair strong enough to draw out tears or anger anymore. Only emptiness stretches from morning to night, like a cold corridor without an end. In the first days after leaving Westlake, I was submerged in that emptiness. I trusted no one, not even myself. The few messages that came in were mostly hollow words. Collaboration invitations quickly evaporated the moment people heard that I had been filtered out from my old company for not aligning with the new strategic direction. I became a fading shadow in the harsh marketing world where success was measured by speed and noise. Yet, strangely, even during the emptiest days, a tiny seed quietly sprouted. At first, it was just a few meaningless scribbles in an old notebook, fragmented thoughts about what marketing should truly be. Not the noisy trend-chasing campaigns, but stories that touch the deepest parts of the human heart. I recalled the eyes of clients who once sat across from me, those who needed more than just a campaign, who needed someone to truly listen to them. Emotional marketing was not just a slogan. It was what made me fall in love with this profession. It was the real value I had forgotten amid the noisy races and cold hands like Ryan Turner. I began spending late nights, when the city slept, rereading old materials and classic case studies, trying to find myself again. I learned how to analyze new markets, how to apply digital technology to storytelling, how to build a personal brand in an era where trust was so easily broken. Each night, the faint yellow light of my desk lamp shone on pages filled with cramped notes, sketches of ideas that no one would pay for, at least not now. But I kept doing it because some part of me refused to die. The first real challenge came when I accidentally met Sarah at a small seminar about digital transformation for small and medium businesses. She was sitting in the last row, her face more tired than I remembered. We locked eyes through the crowd. Sarah approached, hesitant, after a few awkward pleasantries. She told me that since my departure, Her projects had been constantly struggling. Ryan and his new team no longer had the patience to listen as we once did. Everything now revolved around KPIs, ROIs, cold numbers. Sarah spoke softly, almost as if she was afraid someone might hear. That evening, Sarah messaged me, a short, simple message that tightened my chest. If I ever start my own business, I will think of you first. I stared at the phone screen for a long time, the pale blue light casting a glow over my trembling fingers. Maybe I still had value. Maybe I had not truly disappeared. 1 week later, I made a decision. It was not a loud announcement or a grand declaration, just a small but steady change. I began accepting small freelance projects, designing communication strategies for newly founded brands and family businesses that could not afford big agencies. I worked out of cafes, public libraries, sometimes with nothing more than an old laptop and a cold cup of coffee. Each project tested my faith in myself. There were times when clients disappeared after receiving the initial concepts. There were times when I worked for a month only to be met with a polite apology because the budget had changed. Each small failure cut like a tiny wound. But this time, I did not let them bleed me dry. I learned to stand up, brush off the dust, and move forward. I realized that a remarkable comeback does not happen in a single explosive moment, but through hundreds, thousands of quiet falls and rises. One quiet weekend evening, while I was editing a marketing plan for a small bookstore, I received an email from Marissa, only 2 lines. I am sorry for staying silent. Ryan is pushing things too far. If you need anything, I am here. I sat frozen in front of the screen, heart pounding, not because I needed help, but because in the ruins I had left behind, there were still a few stones that had not yet collapsed. I replied to Marissa with an invitation for coffee. We met in a small cafe tucked away in a quiet alley, where the soft yellow light spilled over steaming cups of coffee. Marissa shared more than I expected. She spoke of how Ryan was manipulating numbers, forcing employees to sign off on false reports, pushing out anyone who dared to resist. Daniel, now the head of marketing, lacked serious experience and was gradually eroding the trust of their longtime clients. Every detail Marissa shared clicked into place in my mind. The picture became clear. Westlake, a company once built on real values, was rotting from within. And Ryan, the one who had stolen my work, was steering it towards collapse. But I did not smile. I did not feel triumphant. I only felt a heavy silence settling inside, because I understood that their downfall was not something I sought. What I wanted, from the very beginning, was simply to prove that I was never small, never invisible, as they once believed. In the days that followed, I began to plan, not for revenge with obvious blows, but to build something sturdier and more beautiful from what had been lost. I gathered a small group of people who had also been hurt by broken systems, a designer fired for not being innovative enough, a content specialist pushed aside for not keeping up with growth speed, a freelance developer left unpaid for months by his former employer. We met in cramped coffee shops, under the soft yellow lights, armed with old laptops and fragile dreams. We shared ideas, supported one another, and started building from the smallest bricks, a new model of emotional marketing, focused on real values, on stories that touched hearts instead of hollow campaigns. It was not an easy journey. Each step was tested by old fears, financial shortages, and skeptical looks from people who did not believe that an extraordinary comeback was even possible. Yet in those precarious moments, I felt truly alive, no longer a shadow wandering the cold corridors of Westlake, no longer a victim of a power game, but a person writing her own story with her own hands. There were mornings when, as I opened my eyes, the air seemed to freeze inside the small room. A strange stillness wrapped around me. But this time, it was not the paralyzing emptiness that had weighed on me the day I left Westlake. It was a tension, tight like a string just before it sings its first note. That was when I knew the spiral Ryan Turner had set in motion was starting to turn against him. The first news came from an unexpected source. Sarah, during a conversation with a new partner, discovered that the Revive campaign Westlake was heavily promoting was actually a poor copy of the original concept I had developed. A detailed presentation file was even leaked during an online meeting when a former employee accidentally sent an old draft to the entire client list. My name remained there at the bottom of the page, a small line that could not be erased. Rumors began to spread across the marketing world faster than any viral campaign. Westlake, once proud of its genuine values, was now whispered about for stealing work, internal plagiarism, and client deception. Sarah, as a major client, decided to terminate her contract and quietly took 2 other partners with her. Ryan scrambled to organize emergency meetings, his once cold face now creased with visible tension. Daniel, who had been promoted as the new face of the company, exposed serious data errors during an important pitch, shaking the client's trust in Westlake's entire data system. I did not witness these moments directly, but each message from Marissa, each hurried call from former colleagues, painted a vivid picture of collapse in my mind. I heard that the HR department was investigating anonymous complaints about a toxic work environment, that the legal department was drafting explanations for customer data breaches, and that many former employees were speaking out on professional forums about the ruthless treatment they had endured under Ryan's leadership. Yet what truly made me realize the spiral had begun was when a strange email appeared in my inbox. A proposal from a major client who had once belonged to Westlake. No explanations, no elaborate justifications, just a straightforward request. They needed a new team to restore their brand image after successive failures, and they wanted me to lead it. I sat before the screen, the light from the window sweeping over the neat lines of text, my heart as still as a quiet lake, not because of joy, but because I understood that somehow, in my silent persistence, I had begun to reconnect with the world beyond. I accepted the offer, not hastily, not boasting, but quietly, as I had chosen from the beginning. The new project was not easy. The client, having lost trust after their bad experience with Westlake, demanded complete transparency, from workflows to every line of expense. My small team and I worked tirelessly, checking every detail, rebuilding each relationship from scratch. There were moments when the pressure was almost unbearable, when old wounds stung under new doubts. But I refused to let myself stop, because I knew this was not just another project. This was a chance to prove that real value still had a place in a world full of deception. Meanwhile, at Westlake, Ryan began to lose control. Marissa told me he would frequently explode in meetings, blaming subordinates for every failure, then making rash decisions in a desperate attempt to save face. Emily, the young intern who once cried over a small mistake, was now carrying entire campaigns without guidance. Daniel, once so highly favored, now revealed his inexperience and lack of resilience under real pressure. One afternoon, as I reviewed the final draft of a new communication plan, Marissa called. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from emotion. "Jada," she said, "Ryan has just been suspended. The board gathered enough evidence of internal misconduct. He has to leave." I leaned back in my chair, the late afternoon sun bathing my hair in gold, feeling as though a mountain had been lifted from my chest. not because I had waited for his downfall, but because I knew the truth had finally been seen. Yet the biggest twist was still to come. A week later, at a major industry networking event, I overheard a conversation. A multinational marketing firm was looking for a local partner to penetrate deeper into the market, and among the list of potential agencies, the small name of the team I had just formed was mentioned. I could hardly believe my ears, partly because of the modest size of our group, partly because just a few months ago, I had been unemployed, sitting in a rented room with a cold cup of coffee. That was the moment I realized that a remarkable comeback does not always roar like in the movies. Sometimes it is just a stronger beat in the chest, a small but unwavering light shining in the dark. It is the countless times we rise after every fall, the choice to hold on to our real values when the world demands we compromise. When I received the official invitation from that corporation to discuss collaboration, I simply nodded silently at my own reflection in the mirror. No fireworks, no stage, just a quiet reminder to myself, I am still here. I have rebuilt myself from the ruins left by others. In the following weeks, I watched the downfall of Westlake as a distant spectator outside a crumbling circus tent. Contracts were canceled one by one. Talented employees found ways to leave. Loyal clients turned their backs. Ryan Turner, once perched high atop power, became nothing more than a faded name, mentioned only in bitter jokes about lessons learned in the industry. I did not feel joy hearing those news, nor did I feel triumph, because I understood that real revenge through success does not come from seeing the betrayer fall. It comes from proving to myself and to those who once doubted that I deserved something better. And I knew that this journey was far from over, but at least, this time, every step I took was truly my own, no longer the shadow in someone else's game. There are moments that pass without noise or fanfare, yet you know you have crossed a threshold, a boundary that once stepped over. You can never return to who you were before. I sat alone in my small room, the lamp casting its glow across the rough wooden table, staring at my latest project plan. Outside, the city stretched under golden lights like an inverted sea of stars. A quiet thought crept into my mind, not exploding but smoldering like embers. I was ready. The meeting with the international corporation took place on a cloudy morning. The air felt thick over the congested streets, gray clouds pressing down on the towering buildings. I walked into the grand lobby, dressed in a neat light gray suit, not to appear strong, but to remind myself that this time I would bow to no one, no longer the girl shrinking in the corner of a conference room while others took credit for my work, no longer the diligent employee dismissed with an indifferent nod. When the conference room door opened, I saw the faces of the people across the table, serious, patient, but filled with expectation. One of them, the regional executive director, handed me a thick folder. Inside was a long-term cooperation proposal, offering nearly absolute creative freedom for my team. No more being tied down by rigid policies, no more enduring unreasonable targets. They were not merely seeking an executor, they needed a guide, someone who understood that emotional marketing was not just a strategy, but the very heartbeat of a brand in an era where trust was fragile. We discussed for 3 hours. I presented, analyzed, listened, and countered every word I spoke, every slide that appeared. Felt like a gentle but firm tap against the wall of skepticism that I knew existed among those who had witnessed too many failures. When the meeting ended, the executive shook my hand, his eyes no longer filled with doubt, but lit with something rare in the cold world of business trust. That evening, as I stepped out of the building, the sky unexpectedly cleared, Late sunlight slipped across the rooftops, leaving warm streaks along the streets. I paused at a small cafe, placed my laptop down, and ordered an espresso while waiting. I checked my phone. A new message from Marissa appeared. Ryan has been officially banned from participating in any project management activities at Westlake. The company is seeking to restructure entirely. I stared at the words, feeling emptier than celebratory. Part of me had anticipated this outcome. Another part understood that someone else's downfall was never my true victory. The real victory, I realized, was when resentment no longer dictated your heart. It was when you knew you were strong enough without needing others to validate the pain you endured. It was when you moved forward without looking back, carrying every hard-earned lesson as part of your path ahead. In the following days, my team officially signed the contract with the corporation. We moved into a small office on the 11th floor of an old building, where the elevator creaked every time it opened. But to me, it was a more beautiful beginning than any gleaming tower could offer. Because here, every idea was heard, every effort was valued, and every dream had a chance to grow. I spent many late nights sitting alone in that office, the yellow light casting long shadows on the walls. I thought about those who had believed in me when no one else did, about those who stood with me through the bleakest days, about Sarah, the first client who placed her faith in a nearly broken Jada, about Marissa, who had the courage to turn her back on wrongdoing to seek the truth, about the young faces in my team, carrying unhealed wounds, yet still choosing to believe that emotional marketing and lasting relationships could exist in a practical world. One night, during an internal meeting, I looked around the crowded room filled with laughter and lively debate. I knew I had come a long way, from a cold rented room, from wandering the city with empty hands, from long nights facing the fear of failure. And now, I was not just standing, I was reaching out to embrace a new world, no longer an outsider, but a creator. The greatest turning point was not when I signed a contract with a large corporation. It was not when Westlake began to crumble. It was the moment I realized that true value does not need to scream to be recognized. It only needs to live true to its nature, quietly and steadfastly, like an underground river carving through the hardest layers of earth. I stood at the office window, looking out over the endless streets under the city's lights. Somewhere out there, people like me were still fighting in silence, those who had been betrayed, dismissed, cast aside. I wished I could tell them that a remarkable comeback does not start with a loud revenge. It starts with the decision not to let bitterness define who you are, with quiet perseverance. One small step, one long day at a time, I turned back to my desk, opened my laptop, and began drafting the first email for our new communication campaign. A campaign that did not aim for glittering facades, but for real stories, real people, brands willing to live by their true values in a world full of pretense. And I knew that when the stage lights faded and the applause died down, only authenticity could endure in people's hearts. My fingers moved steadily across the keyboard, each word appearing clear and strong. No more trembling, no more doubt. I was ready, not just to return, but to step onto an entirely new path, one where what I built would not be so easily taken away again. Outside, light rain was falling, painting the streets with a silvery sheen. I closed my laptop, stood up, and walked toward the door. Beyond it, the whole city was waiting, not to hand me a crown, but to let me claim my rightful place with the real values I had fought to preserve. This time, I would not need anyone's permission to shine. There are successes that do not need to be announced. They only need to exist, firm and steady, like a tree growing through a crack in stone, silent yet persistent. I realized this during the first days when the campaigns created by our team began to make their mark on the market. They were not noisy, trend-chasing campaigns, but stories that touched hearts, stories about real people, real pain, and genuine dreams. The name of our company, once just a small line on a contract, began appearing at major seminars and in in-depth articles about emotional marketing. Invitations for collaboration started arriving from honest brands willing to challenge outdated values. No more cold handshakes made only for hitting targets, but relationships built on mutual respect and genuine connection. I did not need to confront Ryan Turner or any of those who once pushed me into the shadows. I only needed to let my work speak, and it spoke louder than any defense I could have made. The numbers needed no exaggeration. The heartfelt feedback from clients needed no editing. It was the real values that created the remarkable comeback I had once only dared to dream of during lonely nights. From our small office on the 11th floor, we moved to a larger, light-filled space where every member could look out over the stretching city below. It was not just a physical change, but a sign that the journey of rebuilding from ruins had reached a new chapter, a place where no one had to bow their head, where no one had to trade their dignity for survival. One early autumn day, as gentle winds stirred the streets, I happened to hear news about Ryan Turner. He had left the city after Westlake failed in a series of restructuring projects. The once iconic company of creative marketing was now just a faded name on the list of brands in need of reputation recovery. Those who once flocked around Ryan now scattered, avoiding mention of him as if he were an unhealed wound. I did not feel triumphant, nor did I feel pity. It was simply like standing before ancient ruins. You cannot hate the broken stones because they are merely the natural result of foundations that had already rotted. The price paid did not come from my hands. It came from arrogance, from losing the most important element in any relationship, trust. One afternoon, as I was sitting in a meeting room preparing for a major campaign, an unexpected message arrived. It was from Emily, the young woman who had once cried in front of me years ago. The message was short, but powerful enough to make me sit still for a long while. Thank you for not changing. Because of you, I believe that kindness does not always lose. I lifted my head and looked at the young faces outside the meeting room. Those who carried not just ambition, but a belief that true values, if protected until the end, would never disappear. I knew then that what I was building was not just a company. I was planting seeds of hope for a new generation, so they would not have to pay the price for the mistakes we once made. When our major campaign launched, the response exceeded all expectations. Specialist articles praised how we connected brands to customers through simple yet profound real-life stories. Some major clients who had once turned away from Westlake now sought us out, not because of gimmicks, but because they found here something increasingly rare in the market: authenticity. I stood on the rooftop of our new building, looking over the shimmering city lights. My heart was as calm as a still lake at night. There was no sense of gloating victory, no urge to prove anything to anyone, only a deep gratitude to the version of myself who had endured the days that seemed impossible, yet never let go. Some wounds never fully heal, but they stop hurting. They become part of you, like invisible tattoos reminding you that you have survived the harshest winters and still stand tall. I thought of Ryan, of Westlake, of the days that had once seemed utterly lost, and I smiled, not because I had won, but because I had not let myself become a loser in my own story. When night fell, I returned to the office where desk lamps still glowed and where small dreams continued growing through each draft. each meeting, each cold cup of coffee. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps light against the cold tiles, like the steady heartbeat within me. Before the large glass window, I paused. Out there, the city kept moving relentlessly, people still running within their exhausting cycles. I wondered how many out there felt small, betrayed, cast out from the places they once believed they belonged. And I wished I could tell them that a remarkable comeback is not a miracle reserved for the few. It is the right of anyone brave enough to believe that their true value cannot be stripped away. I touched the cold glass gently, as if reaching out to an old version of myself, the girl who once sat alone in a dark rented room, trembling as she clung to the last shards of belief. That girl was no longer the same, not because she now had everything, but because she had learned how not to lose herself amid all that was lost. That night, before leaving the office, I left a small note on the desk, written in the familiar neat handwriting, "Build, even when no one sees." A reminder, not only for myself, but for all those who would walk through this place after me, carrying their own dreams. If anyone ever asks me what the most precious lesson I learned through all the storms was, I will answer softly, that sometimes winning is not about rising higher than others. It is about standing strong within yourself. That sometimes success does not need to blaze brightly. It only needs to be deep enough to become the foundation for a new life. And that in a world full of betrayal and failure, trust, once protected, will always be a light that never goes out. Have you ever been underestimated? Ever been pushed out of the places you thought you belonged? If so, remember this: you are not small. You were simply standing in a place too narrow to contain your true worth. And when you decide to step out, do not look back, because everything you need has always been within you from the very beginning.